The quantum glass windows of New Geneva Station hummed with barely contained energy as Ambassador Elena Vasquez adjusted her ceremonial collar for the 15th time in 10 minutes. The diplomatic suite's environmental controls had been recalibrated 3 times to accommodate their guests, though nobody was entirely sure what atmospheric preferences the Zephyrians actually had. The advanced team's reports had been frustratingly vague, consisting mostly of phrases like "breathe something approximating oxygen" and "doesn't immediately die in standard gravity." "Ambassador, the translation matrix is giving me grief again." Lieutenant Torres called from behind a bank of humming processors that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a serious crystal fetish. "It keeps trying to translate their bioluminescent patterns into ancient Mandarin poetry. Very beautiful ancient Mandarin poetry, but probably not what they're actually saying." Elena sighed and walked over to examine the readout. The Zephyrian approach vector showed their organic ships moving in perfect formation, each vessel pulsing with soft bioluminescence that painted rainbow patterns across their hulls. It was undeniably beautiful, but the translation algorithm seemed convinced they were reciting epic poems about rainfall and forgotten lovers rather than standard diplomatic protocols. "Just set it to general approximation mode," she said, watching the ships grow larger on the tactical display. "If they start glowing angry colors, we'll improvise." The station's AI, which had been nicknamed HAL by someone with a disturbing sense of historical irony, chimed in with its perpetually cheerful voice. "Ambassador Vasquez, incoming transmission from the lead Zephyrian vessel. Audio only, as their visual communications appear to involve interpretive dance performed by their ship's exterior." "Put it through." The voice that filled the chamber was melodious, with subtle harmonics that made Elena think of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Greetings, children of Terra. I am Lyra, speaker for the collective's harmony. We approach with songs of peace and the gentle correction of misunderstanding." Elena frowned. The phrase "gentle correction" didn't sit well in her diplomatic lexicon, but she pressed forward. "Welcome to New Geneva Station, Speaker Lyra. We're honored by your presence and look forward to establishing relations between our peoples." A pause stretched across the communications channel, filled with what sounded like distant musical discussions. When Lyra's voice returned, it carried a note of what Elena could only describe as maternal concern. "Your words create beautiful patterns, though we sense the discord beneath. Fear not, for the collective has guided 17 worlds toward proper harmony. Your species shows much promise." Lieutenant Torres caught Elena's eye and made a subtle gesture that, in diplomatic circles, roughly translated to, "What the hell does that mean?" Elena shared his confusion but maintained her professional composure. "We appreciate your guidance, Speaker Lyra. Perhaps we could discuss the specifics of our relationship during the formal ceremony." "Indeed, small one. We shall dock with your constructed shell shortly. Please prepare your most developed artists and philosophers for evaluation. The others may observe and learn." The transmission ended, leaving Elena staring at the communications array with growing unease. "Torres, pull up everything we have on these Zephyrians. And I mean everything: intercepted communications, long-range sensor data, rumors from the outer colonies. Something tells me this isn't going to be a standard first contact scenario." As Torres bent over his console, Elena moved to the observation deck where the ceremonial reception would take place. The room had been decorated with humanity's finest achievements: holographic displays showcasing Earth's greatest artworks, musical compositions playing softly in the background, and carefully selected examples of human literature translated into 17 different languages. It all seemed rather inadequate now, though she couldn't quite articulate why. The Zephyrian ships completed their docking procedures with an organic grace that made the station's mechanical systems look clunky by comparison. Their vessels seemed to melt into the docking ports, forming seamless connections that pulsed with the same gentle bioluminescence. Alina watched through the reinforced windows as figures began moving through the organic tunnels that had somehow grown between the ships and the station. "Ambassador," HAL announced, "the Zephyrian delegation is approaching the reception hall. Sensors indicate 5 individuals, all within normal human physiological parameters except for, well, the readings are a bit unusual." Unusual how? Their neural activity suggests some form of collective consciousness, and their ears appear to be approximately 40% longer than baseline human norms. Also, 3 of them are literally glowing, but that might be fashion rather than biology. Alina straightened her uniform one final time as the reception hall's doors dilated. The first Zephyrian to enter took her breath away, though not entirely in a good way. Lyra stood nearly 6 feet tall with an elegant, almost ethereal bearing that spoke of perfect genetic optimization. Her skin held a faint luminescent quality, shifting through subtle patterns of blue and silver that reminded Alina uncomfortably of a mood ring. But it was her ears that truly marked her as alien, elongated and pointed. They extended upward and backward from her skull in graceful curves that somehow managed to be both beautiful and unsettling. "Ambassador Vasquez," Lyra said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as the transmission, but with an undertone of amused condescension that set Alina's teeth on edge. "How charming to meet you in your constructed environment. We have studied your species extensively and find your potential quite promising." Alina stepped forward with practiced diplomatic grace. "Speaker Lyra, on behalf of humanity, I welcome you to New Geneva Station. We hope this marks the beginning of a long and mutually beneficial relationship between our peoples." Lyra's pointed ears twitched in what might have been amusement, and her skin patterns shifted to deeper blues and purples. Mutually beneficial, such delightfully primitive concepts. You think in terms of trade, of exchange, of quid pro quo. The collective has moved beyond such limitations. She gestured to her companions, whose ears were decorated with intricate metallic traceries that pulsed in synchronization with their bioluminescent patterns. "We offer something far more valuable than mere commerce. We offer elevation." The translation matrix chose that moment to hiccup, and Lieutenant Tor's voice echoed through the chamber with barely suppressed panic. "Ambassador, the AI is now convinced they're speaking in mathematical theorems expressed through skin pigmentation. It wants to know if we should alert the xenobiology department or the philosophy faculty." Alina maintained her diplomatic smile, while internally cursing the universe's sense of timing. "Perhaps we could begin with the traditional exchange of gifts. It's customary among humans to share symbols of our respective cultures during first contact." Lyra's skin patterns brightened with what Alina hoped was pleasure rather than predatory anticipation. "How wonderfully anthropological. Yes, we shall examine your primitive offerings and provide appropriate corrections." She reached into what appeared to be a living pouch that had grown from her garment and withdrew an object that defied easy description. It looked like a crystal flower, but it sang with harmonious tones and seemed to exist in more dimensions than Alina's eyes could quite process. "This is a harmony resonator," Lyra explained, offering the object with the patience one might show a slow child. "It will help your people understand proper aesthetic balance. Simply place it near your artistic endeavors and it will guide them toward more suitable expressions." Alina accepted the gift carefully, noting that it felt warm and seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Thank you. In return, we offer this collection of human artistic achievements, music, literature, visual arts, and philosophical works that represent the breadth of human creative expression." She handed over a sophisticated data crystal containing humanity's cultural archives, expecting Lyra to accept it with the same ceremonial gravity. Instead, the Zephyrian held it up to the light, her pointed ears drooping slightly as her skin patterns shifted to what could only be described as disappointed orange. "Oh, you poor creatures," Lyra said with genuine sympathy. "Look at how you've struggled with such limited understanding. This random collection of emotional outbursts and intellectual fumbling shows such effort. The collective will help you organize these impulses into proper artistic expression." Alina felt. Captain Jake Morrison stared at the tactical display, with the kind of expression usually reserved for discovering your coffee, had been replaced with decaffeinated swill. The mining colony of Kepler 442b stretched across his view screen like a stubborn rash, and somewhere down there, aliens were apparently redecorating humanity's cultural centers while shooting at anyone who complained about their interior design choices. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park called from the communications station, "we're receiving another transmission from the surface. The colonists are, well, they're confused." Morrison rubbed his temples, where a headache was building like a supernova in slow motion. 3 months had passed since the diplomatic disaster at New Geneva Station, and the Zephyrian Cultural Adjustment campaign had taken a turn that defied every military manual ever written. "Put them through." The voice that crackled over the comm belonged to Colony Administrator Williams, a man who normally sounded like he could argue with a black hole and win. Today he sounded like someone who'd spent too long trying to understand modern art while being shot at by critics. "Captain Morrison, they've taken the sculpture garden again. But here's the thing, they're not destroying anything. They're improving it. My statue of the colony founders now plays symphonic music when you walk past it, and the memorial fountain has been turned into some kind of holographic light show that tells the story of human artistic development. It's actually quite beautiful, but they keep shooting those color beam things at anyone who tries to change it back." Morrison looked around the bridge of the Indomitable, where his crew was trying very hard not to laugh. "Administrator Williams, are you telling me that hostile aliens have invaded your colony to forcibly redecorate your public spaces?" That's actually a pretty accurate summary, yes. Oh, and Captain, they left a review. 5 stars for primitive charm and significant improvement potential. But they docked points for our aggressive resistance to aesthetic guidance. The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of life support systems, and what sounded suspiciously like Ensign Rodriguez trying to muffle a snort behind his console. Morrison closed his eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages, including one he'd picked up from a particularly philosophical bartender on Titan. "Sir," his tactical officer, Commander Lisa Hayes, spoke up with the tone of someone delivering news about a particularly virulent plague. "I'm reading multiple Zephyrian bioships in the sculpture garden sector. They appear to be, well, the scanner interpretation is a bit unusual." "How unusual?" Hayes consulted her readouts with the expression of someone who'd been asked to explain quantum physics to a particularly slow houseplant. "According to our sensors, they're performing what the computer classifies as aggressive interpretive dance with hostile intent. The AI has requested permission to file this under combat operations or performance art, but it's having trouble deciding which." Morrison felt that familiar sensation of the universe playing practical jokes at his expense. "Commander Hayes, are you telling me that our enemy is fighting us through the medium of dance?" "That's not the weird part, sir. The weird part is that our tactical computer has started providing combat assessments in the style of art criticism. It just recommended we counter their bold neo-expressionist assault patterns with a more traditional defensive ballet focusing on structural integrity over emotional impact." The captain looked at his bridge crew, noting that several of them were now openly grinning despite the fact that they were technically in a combat situation. "Right. Hayes, launch a full tactical assessment of the situation down there. And tell the computer to stick to military terminology, even if the enemy is pirouetting while they shoot at us." The main view screen shifted to show the surface of Kepler 442b, where the sculpture garden had indeed become a battlefield, unlike anything in human military history. Zephyrian warriors moved between the art installations with fluid grace, their elongated ears adorned with what looked like neural interfaces that pulsed in perfect synchronization. Leading them was a figure Morrison recognized from the intelligence briefings, Lyra herself, the speaker who'd started this whole mess. Her pointed ears now bore elaborate scarification that caught the light as she moved, and her skin patterns had grown more complex, shifting through cascades of color that seemed to coordinate the movements of her entire force. She directed her warriors with gestures that looked more like conducting an orchestra than commanding troops, and Morrison had to admit that the effect was disturbingly beautiful. "Sir," Park called out, "we're receiving a direct transmission from the Zephyrian commander. It's addressed to you personally." "Put it through." Lyra's voice filled the bridge with the same musical quality Morrison remembered from the reports, but now it carried undertones of patient disappointment that reminded him uncomfortably of his third-grade art teacher. "Captain Morrison of the vessel Indomitable, your arrival is most timely. We have been expecting you." Morrison leaned forward in his command chair, trying to project authority while talking to someone who was currently redecorating a mining colony through interpretive violence. "Speaker Lyra, I'm ordering you to cease your attacks on human colonies and withdraw your forces immediately." A pause filled with what sounded like distant laughter, harmonized in ways that human vocal cords couldn't quite manage. "Oh, Captain, such delightfully primitive thinking. These are not attacks, they are interventions. Your people have been crying out for artistic guidance, though they lack the sophistication to recognize their need." On the view screen, Morrison watched as Zephyrian warriors used their weapons to transform human security guards into what could only be described as temporary art installations. The guards weren't harmed. They were simply encased in shimmering energy fields that changed their colors and made them emit musical tones when they moved. It was probably the most humane military action in recorded history, and somehow that made it more disturbing than traditional warfare. "Speaker Lyra, those are human beings, not art supplies." Such a narrow perspective. Your species shows such potential, yet you insist on limiting yourselves to purely functional existence. Observe how much more beautiful your people become when properly enhanced. Lyra's transmission included visual data showing the transformed guards, who were indeed quite spectacular to look at, though their muffled protests suggested they didn't appreciate the aesthetic improvement. Commander Hayes looked up from her tactical display with the expression of someone who'd been asked to calculate the military significance of a finger painting. "Sir, I'm reading massive energy buildup from the Zephyrian bioships, but the pattern is unusual." "Define unusual, Commander." "They appear to be charging their weapons in time with classical music, sir. Specifically, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The computer is having some kind of existential crisis trying to classify this as either a combat formation or a very large orchestra." Morrison felt his headache evolving into something that might require its own gravitational field. "Weapons status, Hayes." "All systems ready, sir. Though the targeting computer keeps asking if we're sure we want to shoot at what it classifies as the most aesthetically pleasing enemy formation in recorded military history." On the screen, Lyra continued her graceful coordination of the battle, her elongated ears twitching with what Morrison was learning to recognize as alien amusement. Her forces had now transformed the entire sculpture garden into a living. Admiral Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display floating above the Terran Defense Council's conference table and wondered if someone had slipped psychoactive compounds into the station's coffee supply. The three-dimensional map showed 17 star systems scattered across the galaxy, each one marked with symbols that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a degree in interpretive geometry and a serious obsession with musical notation. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Senator Rodriguez said, adjusting his glasses with the careful precision of someone who suspected reality had taken an unexpected left turn. These Zephyrians have spent the last millennium traveling around the galaxy, helping other species improve their artistic sensibilities. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, the Council's chief xenobiologist, nodded while consulting a data pad that seemed to be displaying information in colors that didn't technically exist. According to the intelligence we've gathered from captured bioships, yes, they call it cultural elevation. The process involves systematic intervention in a species' artistic and philosophical development, usually spanning several generations. Chen leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of command settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket made of bureaucratic nightmares. And they've done this 17 times successfully. Define successfully, Doctor. Reeves replied with the tone of someone who'd spent too much time translating alien concepts into human language. The Zephyrian records indicate complete cultural transformation in all cases. The species in question showed dramatic improvements in aesthetic appreciation, philosophical sophistication, and what they term harmonious social organization. Senator Martinez, who had been quietly reviewing classified reports, looked up with an expression that suggested he'd been reading fiction instead of intelligence briefings. Doctor, what happened to the original cultures of these 17 species? Dr. Reeves consulted her impossibly colorful data pad again. That's where the translation matrix starts giving us problems. The Zephyrian term roughly translates as gentle obsolescence through enlightenment. Their records suggest that the original cultural patterns were superseded by more refined expressions. Superseded, Chen repeated, tasting the word like something that had gone bad in the back of the refrigerator. Doctor, are we talking about cultural genocide disguised as art therapy? The distinction may be academic at this point, Admiral. What matters is that the Zephyrians view humanity as their most promising project yet. Apparently, our primitive aggression combined with surprising creative potential makes us ideal candidates for their improvement process. The conference room's AI, which had been nicknamed Artemis by someone with classical education and questionable judgment, chimed in with its characteristic blend of helpfulness and existential confusion. Admiral Chen, incoming priority transmission from Captain Morrison aboard the Indomitable. He reports that the Zephyrian cultural adjustment operations have entered what he describes as Phase 2, collaborative improvement. Chen rubbed her temples where a headache was building like a slow-motion supernova. Put him through. Captain Morrison's voice filled the chamber with the strained patience of someone who'd been trying to conduct military operations while being critiqued by alien art critics. Admiral, the situation on Kepler 442b has evolved. The Zephyrians have stopped transforming our people into temporary art installations and started inviting them to participate in what they call guided creative expression. Explain, Captain. They've set up workshops, Admiral. The mining colony now hosts daily sessions on proper aesthetic appreciation and harmonious social interaction. The colonists are, well, they're attending voluntarily. In fact, we've had to establish a waiting list. Senator Rodriguez leaned forward with the expression of someone who'd been told that gravity had been repealed by popular vote. Captain, are you saying that human civilians are willingly participating in alien cultural indoctrination? I'm saying they're enjoying it, sir. Colony Administrator Williams sent me a holographic sculpture he made during yesterday's emotional expression through crystalline matrices workshop. It's actually quite beautiful, though it does sing opera when you look at it wrong. Chen felt reality slipping away from her like soap in a zero-gravity shower. Captain, what's the military situation? That's the problem, Admiral. There isn't one, exactly. The Zephyrians have stopped treating this as a conflict and started treating it as an educational opportunity. Their commander, Speaker Lyra, keeps sending me invitations to expand my tactical thinking through interpretive movement. She seems genuinely concerned about my professional development. The conference room fell silent except for the soft humming of life support systems, and what sounded suspiciously like Senator Martinez trying not to laugh. Chen looked around the table at the assembled representatives of human civilization and realized they were facing a threat that no military academy had ever prepared them for. "Artemis," she said finally, "bring up the classified files on Project Nightfall." The AI's response carried subtle harmonics of what might have been concern, if artificial intelligences could feel such things. "Admiral, those files require level Omega clearance and psychological evaluation of all personnel present. Override authorization Chen Alpha 77, emergency protocols." The holographic display shifted to show technical specifications that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd read too much theoretical physics and not enough ethics textbooks. Senator Rodriguez whistled softly, which was impressive considering he'd gone slightly pale. "Admiral," he said carefully, "please tell me that's not what I think it is." Chen studied the schematics floating before them, noting the elegant mathematical curves that somehow managed to look both beautiful and terrifying. Project Nightfall represents our most advanced theoretical weapon system. It's based on quantum archaeology, the ability to trace and manipulate the causal threads that connect events across spacetime. Dr. Reeves looked up from her data pad with the expression of someone who just realized she was in a room with a live nuclear device. "Admiral, are you talking about temporal warfare?" "More precise than that. Nightfall doesn't just change history, it edits it. The technology can trace a species' entire evolutionary and cultural development backward through time and adjust the parameters that led to their existence." Senator Martinez had gone from pale to the color of old parchment. "You're talking about erasing them from the timeline entirely." "Not erasing," Chen corrected with the precision of someone who'd spent too many sleepless nights reviewing classified files. "Editing, the species would still exist, but their cultural and technological development would follow different paths that would make them less problematic. And you're considering using this on the Zephyrians." Chen looked at the tactical display showing Zephyrian bioships spreading across human space, each one carrying cultural adjustment specialists who genuinely wanted to help humanity become better people. The Zephyrians represent a threat to human autonomy that goes beyond traditional military concerns. They don't want to conquer us, they want to improve us, and they're very good at it. "But Admiral Dr. Reeves said hesitantly, the ethical implications of temporal warfare are staggering. We'd be committing genocide across multiple timelines." "Would we?" Chen pulled up another set of files. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in what had once been the grand plaza of Zephyr Prime, surrounded by crystalline monuments that hummed with harmonies no human ear had ever been designed to hear. The city stretched around him in impossible geometries, its organic architecture flowing like frozen music through dimensions that his brain couldn't quite process. 18 months had passed since Project Nightfall had rewritten the quantum archaeology of an entire species, and he was looking at the result. Lyra sat on what might have been a bench or possibly a living sculpture, her elongated ears drooping with a grief that transcended species boundaries. The neural scarification that had once marked her status within the collective had faded to silver traces across her pointed ears, and her bioluminescent skin patterns flickered weakly, like a dying star trying to remember how to shine. "You know," Morrison said, settling beside her with the careful movements of someone who'd spent too many years carrying the weight of impossible decisions, "my tactical computer still hasn't figured out how to classify our war. It keeps filing the reports under interpretive conflict resolution with musical overtones." Lyra's ears twitched in what might have been the ghost of amusement. "Your artificial minds always were charmingly literal. They see patterns where we saw symphonies, structures where we heard songs." She gestured at the empty plaza around them, where monuments to vanished achievements caught light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Do you remember what we were, Admiral?" Morrison consulted the quantum-encrypted data pad that contained the only complete records of pre-Nightfall Zephyrian civilization. The temporal weapon had been surgically precise, editing the species' development at key historical junctures to eliminate their paternalistic impulses while preserving their essential nature. The result was a people who had achieved incredible cultural sophistication without the compulsion to share it forcibly with others. According to the archives, the Zephyrian Collective was a spacefaring civilization that had elevated 17 species to higher forms of cultural expression through a systematic program of aesthetic intervention and social guidance. Elevated, Lyra repeated, the word carrying harmonics of loss that made Morrison's chest tighten. Such a clinical term for what we thought was love. We saw younger species struggling with violence, with aesthetic crudeness, with social discord, and we couldn't bear to leave them in such pain. She stood and walked to one of the crystalline monuments, her hand passing through holographic displays that showed fragments of memory, images of worlds where art flourished under Zephyrian guidance, species that had abandoned warfare in favor of collaborative creation, civilizations that had achieved harmony through gentle correction. The irony is exquisite, isn't it? She continued, her voice carrying the musical quality Morrison remembered from their first encounter, though it now sounded like a song played on broken instruments. Your species achieved what 17 others could not. You found a way to make us stop helping. Morrison joined her at the monument, watching ghost images of a cultural intervention program that had spanned millennia. The quantum archaeologists estimated that, without the temporal edit, the collective would have reached Earth within the next 50 years. Humanity would have undergone the same transformation as the others. And you would have been happier for it. Your violence would have been channeled into art, your aggression transformed into collaborative creativity. The mining colonies where we conducted our cultural adjustments showed 40% decreases in interpersonal conflict and 60% increases in artistic production. But we wouldn't have been human anymore. Lyra's skin pattern shifted to deep blues and purples, colors that somehow conveyed profound sadness even to alien eyes. No, you would have been something better. All species resist improvement initially. It's part of the process. The Viridian hegemony fought us for 3 decades before they understood the beauty we offered. The crystalline matrices of Proxima 7 took nearly a century to appreciate proper harmonic integration. She touched the monument, and it responded with a cascade of images showing the 17 civilizations the collective had guided to cultural maturity. Each world displayed impossible beauty, art that lived and breathed, music that painted colors in the air, architecture that grew like living things while maintaining perfect mathematical harmony. And now they're gone, Morrison said quietly. Not gone, edited. The Nightfall weapon was remarkably precise. It traced our developmental timeline and adjusted the specific historical moments that led to our compulsion to guide other species. The collective still exists, but they pursue internal perfection rather than external intervention. Morrison watched the holographic displays cycle through images of current Zephyrian society, where identical levels of cultural sophistication existed, but remained contained within their own borders. They had become everything they were before, minus the overwhelming need to share their achievements with the galaxy. But you remember. You're the only one who remembers what we were. Lyra's ears drooped further, and her bioluminescent patterns dimmed to barely visible traces. The quantum editing left me as an observer outside the causal loop, necessary to maintain temporal stability, according to your scientists. I remember every world we guided, every species we helped achieve harmony, every moment of beauty we facilitated. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. I am a living archive of the galaxy's greatest act of compassion, and I am the only one who knows it was lost. Morrison pulled up another file on his data pad, this one containing psychological profiles and recommendations from the post-war analysis team. The xenopsychologists want to study you. They think understanding how you process the temporal edit might help us develop better quantum archaeology techniques. More weapons to edit inconvenient civilizations out of history. More tools to resolve conflicts without genocide. Project Nightfall proved that we can eliminate threats by changing their fundamental nature rather than destroying them outright. It's being hailed as the most humane weapon ever developed. Lyra turned to face him, her elongated ears catching the strange light of her homeworld's altered sun. "Admiral, do you believe that what you did was right?" Morrison had been asking himself that question for 18 months, ever since he'd watched the quantum cascade ripple backward through time, rewriting millions of years of Zephyrian cultural development. "I believe it was necessary. Humanity needed to remain human, even if that meant staying flawed. And the 17 species we had guided to harmony, they remain elevated, but now they lack the teachers who helped them achieve such beauty. Do you think they'll remember how to maintain what they became without us?" The question hit Morrison like a physical blow. In all the strategic planning and ethical debates, no one had considered the long-term implications for the species the collective had already transformed. They existed in states of cultural perfection that they might not be able to sustain without ongoing guidance. "We've sent diplomatic missions to make contact," he said finally. "Humanity wants to establish relationships with all the species in the former collective sphere of influence, to study them, to learn from their elevated state while remaining safely human yourselves." Morrison didn't answer, because they both knew that was exactly what humanity intended. The temporal weapon had given them the best of both worlds. They remained authentically human, while gaining access to civilizations that had achieved the kind of cultural sophistication that the collective had tried to force on them. Lyra walked to the center of the plaza, where a fountain that existed in 7 dimensions created patterns of light and sound that told the story of her people's greatest achievements. "I've made a decision, Admiral. I'm leaving." "Leaving? Where will you go?" She gestured toward the sky, where stars twinkled with frequencies that painted aurora across the atmosphere. The quantum archaeologists left one temporal anchor point active, a pocket dimension outside normal spacetime, where the original causal threads remain intact. "I can exist there with my memories, preserving what we were without interfering in what you've made us become." Morrison felt something twist in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced since watching the quantum cascade erase a species' defining characteristic from history. "You'll